welcome. My name is Matt Ligor, and I'm the host of The Matt Ligor Show, seen here on NORCAM and on YouTube. But today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about question 2 on our upcoming election for next Tuesday. Number 2 question is, as you can see on the screen right here, Commission on Limited Election Spending and Corporate Rights. And we have 2 people here with us today who are going to explain the pro and the con of this question, this ballot question. I know that there's 3 questions that everybody's talking about, and mostly we're getting all the, number 1 is getting all the headlines. But number 2 is important, and it's good to be educated. And I think the most important thing about this question is it's for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. This question affects us all. And it's nice to have something that we can be united on and work together on improving, whatever your decision, whichever way you want to go on it. We just want to be informed. So today, we have with us today Ben, say your last name for me.
Ben Gubits.
Ben Gubits, Paul Craney. Ben, if you could please start out your for question 2, correct?
Sure.
All right.
I am.
And could you just tell us why?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. And thanks for having us on here. Looking forward to this. We're asking folks to vote yes on question 2 because it's time that we as citizens in our democracy take responsibility for the things that happen with our elections and government instead of the big moneyed and corporate interests which now control our government. What we're seeing is since the Citizens United decision, the Supreme Court's decision, Citizens United in 2010, $40 billion being spent in our elections and government. We're seeing a government that's being created to represent just those that can afford to write big campaign checks. And we think that that is the antithesis of what our founders believed what our democracy should do. In a representative government where everybody should have an equal voice in our democracy, right now what we have is an unequal democracy, where democracy has been turned into a marketplace, where those that pay more get more representation. We think that that's unequal. Question 2 will establish a nonpartisan volunteer citizens commission at no cost to the taxpayers to study the impacts of all of this dark money that's making its way into our elections and make recommendations for a 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution that will put political equality back into the Constitution so we can have a level playing field for all Americans. Now, we face a global climate crisis. We have fossil fuel companies that spend unlimited amounts of money in elections to make sure that nothing changes. We have an opioid epidemic in this country, and especially here in Massachusetts, and pharmaceutical companies dump a bunch of money into our campaigns to make sure that nothing changes. We have $21 trillion in debt, and Congress passes a tax break that will impact only the folks the 1% that benefit the most from this, not the folks like my kids and your kids and our grandkids and generations yet unborn. They're going to be left holding the bag for that $21 trillion in debt, so special interests can add a little bit more to their bottom line. Question 2 is about political equality. It's about giving every single citizen an equal voice in our democracy, and question 2 will advance this historic amendment to the United States Constitution.
Okay, excellent. So just to be clear, question 2 is about creating a 28th Amendment, right?
Correct.
Okay, because there's 27 amendments now, and this is about creating a 28th.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. All right. Now, Paul, I'd like to hear your side.
Sure. Well, I think anytime we start talking about campaign finance law, it's a good thing. It's a very complicated issue. Not many people follow it. You have to remember there's national laws and there's state laws in every state. A lot of times these state laws get layered on to other states because you have to deal with all 50 states and the national government. But specifically, question 2, we're against it for the sole purpose that we feel like individuals, employers, and unions are the best judge to regulate their own speech. The government shouldn't be empowered to come up with ways to regulate the public speech. Specifically, question 2 would come up with a commission, a committee, whatever you want to call it. It would empower a bunch of elected officials at the State House, most of them are Democrats, to come up with an amendment idea to amend the U.S. Constitution. That goes squarely against what the Constitution stands for. The Constitution believes that government is not the authority to regulate the public speech. After the U.S. Supreme Court decision of Citizens United, there was a knee-jerk reaction that big money would come in and swoop in and drown out everyone's voice. But I think all three of us could agree that if you looked early on in the presidential election, no one could have anticipated that Donald Trump would have been the Republican nominee, let alone win the White House. No one could have anticipated that a socialist independent senator from Vermont would have ever had a shot at beating Hillary Clinton. But both Trump and Bernie had one thing in common, which is they activated a very large network of small dollar donations. And more you're starting to see that candidates and campaigns and organizations are looking to build models like that. Less and less, you'll see example after example of the big money, if you will, the big super PAC candidates like Jeb Bush, be able to translate that money into success. So I think the political landscape is starting to change. Part of that reason is because when candidates can get a large network of small dollar donations, they can control their message with the money that they receive. A super PAC can't coordinate their message with the candidate. And oftentimes that doesn't jive with what the candidate or the campaign is trying to do. But anytime you look at campaign finance law, it has to have two filters, two metrics. Is it fair and is it clear? It's so important that campaign finance law is both of those things. It has to be clear so that everyone can obey the law. It has to be fair so that all the different sides of the debate can take advantage of the law fairly. So Citizens United, when it took place, allowed unions, employers, which include nonprofit organizations, and individuals to have the same type of voice in elections, allowed them to have an unlimited voice in the process. I can understand, and rightly so, that the thought of big money in elections bothers people. But I would just remind folks that, big money doesn't translate to worth. There's a lot of ways to get your message out, even if you don't have, quote, big money. The best examples I could give people is, I could write op-eds. I can publish my op-eds in the Boston Globe.
Op-eds, just for the people who don't know.
Yeah, like letters to the editors,
Okay. Yep.
Written messages in newspapers that I could do because I feel like I'm a somewhat decent writer on topics. And that message can get out. There's different ways for people to get their message out in the political process that doesn't deal with money. And you see that more and more, especially with social media on Twitter.
Yeah.
There's countless people who have huge followings on Instagram and Twitter that they're able to get their message out. I mean, Taylor Swift, I think, registered some obscene amount of people on social media to register to vote. But my point is, more and more people are getting creative in the political process to get their message out. And it doesn't necessarily mean because they have big money.
Yeah.
Now, I'll acknowledge, a lot of times the candidates with the most money ended up winning. A lot of times the candidates with the most money end up winning because they're the better candidates. They're asking people for votes more than bad candidates. That's part of the competitive process in elections. But going back to this question specifically, it raises the issue of campaign finance law, which I think is important. But my problem with it is that it empowers elected officials to come up with ways to regulate the public speech. And in this case, it deals with the state house officials, so the governor, the attorney general, I believe, I think the secretary of state, the Senate president, and the speaker. Most of those people are Democrats. And to put that in perspective for everyone to kind of understand what that would look like on a national level would be how many people here listening to your program would be comfortable with President Donald Trump and Speaker Paul Ryan coming up with ways to regulate the public speech.
Oh, tons of people.
On the,
Kidding, go ahead, yeah.
On the flip side, how many people would be comfortable with Speaker Nancy Pelosi and President Cory Booker regulating their speech?
Exactly.
I mean, the point is, when you empower elected officials to come up with ways to regulate speech, it's always going to be problematic. And that's why the Constitution entrusts the public to have their voice protected.
Let me ask you a question. I just want to ask you one question, then I'll give you a chance to.
Yeah, we'd love to jump in
So,
here. Yeah.
isn't this going to be though an elected or a committee of private citizens? They said there's no age requirement, so that means you got to be old enough to vote. Obviously, they're not going to let a teenager come in and do it. But isn't it going to be made up of 15 individuals, like business owners, or did I misunderstand that?
I think he can answer that question.
Yeah, I'd love to answer that question. I think that what's important to distinguish from what my friend Paul is saying is that when he's talking about speech, he's talking about money and concentrated power. So don't confuse that with what he says with speech. And the other thing that Paul has said is that this is the question too is somehow about elected officials censoring speech, and that's not at all what it is. Perhaps Paul hasn't read the question fully, but to your question, isn't this about private citizens and individuals serving on a volunteer basis on a commission? That's exactly what it is. If you actually read the text of the measure, which I encourage people to do at peoplegovernNotMoney.org, you can see the full text of the measure there. What you'll see is that these are appointments that are made of average citizens. Anyone can apply to be on this commission. It's an open and transparent process, and the application is open to everybody. It's not politicians that will be occupying these seats on this commission. It's average citizens. And so that's one point that I think that people should understand, that it's not politicians, it's actually citizens, people like you, people like me, even people like Paul, who I encourage to vote yes on too and join and then apply to be on the commission.
Well, would I be on the commission if it passes?
Secondly, you can certainly apply to be on the commission if it passes.
So wait a minute. So if it passes, then they'd create a commission, right?
Right. So if and when question 2 passes, the commission will be established in the beginning of next year. Mm-hmm. Another point that I really want to make is that when Paul talks about speech, again, he's actually talking about money and concentrated power. And it's in the public interest to be able to differentiate between unlimited speech and free speech. Okay? I'll give an example. We have town meeting here in North Reading, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So if I showed up to town meeting in North Reading with a megaphone, right, and I started, saying, exercising my free speech, and let's say maybe I get 5 minutes to speak, and I take 50 minutes to speak, and I take up the whole time, and none of my fellow citizens and neighbors have an opportunity to speak. Now, certainly that's free that's speech, but that's not free speech, because I'm then drowning out the voices of the rest of my neighbors and citizens who don't have an equal voice in that process. That's exactly what big money and corporate interests are doing in our democracy, where they're spending unlimited amounts of money to wipe out the voice of the majority of Americans. I'll give you one specific example. In the 2012 election, 36 super PAC donors wiped out all of the millions of small dollar donors from Barack Obama's campaign and Mitt Romney's campaign combined. That's 36 super PAC donors that wiped out the small dollar donations from the millions of people that donated $200 or less to Mitt Romney or Barack Obama. That's not equal citizenship. That's not an equal level playing field. And even more in more recent history, in 2016, 400 families were responsible for over half of all of the money that was spent in the 2016 election. Now, that doesn't look like democracy to me. That looks like something like oligarchy, something that you might see in a place that doesn't have the democratic principles of equal citizenship in our democracy.
So I got a question. So first of all, I do understand, though, what Paul's saying. We do have really unlimited resources to communicate now that we didn't have even 15 or 20 years ago. Like, you have YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and if you're good at creating an audience, you can have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million followers in no time. All right. So there is the aspect of, you don't need money to get to be popular. I mean, you look at, like, there's a YouTube phenomenon. Her name's Liza, and she's got 15 million followers, and she's got a TV show. I mean, she makes jokes and everything, but she was able to do that all on her own. She didn't put any money, and now she's got a tremendous influence. I do have a question, though. You keep saying, or you did say, money equals talking, or money equals speaking. I forget exactly how you put it. Equals speech. Money equals speech.
Right.
So just explain that to me. I just want to know what you mean by that.
Happy to. Yeah. So in a series of Supreme Court decisions going back to Buckley v. Vallejo in 1976, Citizens United in 2010, and McCutcheon a few years after that, you have some very new and very dangerous Supreme Court precedent that says that spending money an unlimited amount of money to influence elections is protected by First Amendment free speech. Now, we've seen since those decisions conservative justices like Rehnquist and Sandra Day O'Connor that said that that is a dangerous precedent and don't believe that corporations have the same rights as human beings, that money is the same thing as free speech. Now, in the time since Sandra Day O'Connor and Justice Rehnquist, has the First Amendment changed? No. The Supreme Court has changed. Justice Rehnquist died, Sandra Day O'Connor retired, and then we had Alito and Roberts come in with this new dangerous precedent that says that spending money is the same thing as free speech, which I think is vitally wrong, and so do about 8 out of 10 Americans, regardless of political party, whether it's Republicans, whether it's Democrats, whether it's independents alike, believe that the Supreme Court got it vitally wrong, as the Supreme Court has done many times in our history. And what I think it's important to know is that when the Supreme Court gets it wrong, as the Supreme Court has done through generations in American history, the constitutional amendment process has been used to put our republic back on track into where the citizens, the stewards of our democracy, are in control, not big money and special interests.
Okay, all right. Paul, I know you have something to say in regards to what we just talked about. So what do you think about what we just talking about?
So just so your viewers know, we're kind of straying from question 2 at this point. This is a bigger conversation about campaign finance law. I would say that, speech and money go hand in hand. If you need some money in certain examples for the ability to have speech. For instance, if I want to have my voice heard, and let's just say the Eagle Tribune newspaper, which is the local daily newspaper where I live in North Andover, if I want to put a political advertisement or some kind of advertisement, I need money to do that in that newspaper. There's a lot of examples where you can understand if you want your voice to be heard, you need money. And that's why, campaign finance law is pretty clear that speech is money. And I respectfully, I think that's not really a debatable point at this point. Everyone understands that in order to advertise, to get your message out, you need money. Even the private sector, you look at all sorts of industries. I mean, they have ads on television that cost money. Everything costs money to do ads and speech out there. But again, the difference is, what I was making the point before, is you don't necessarily need money to always get your message out. We're talking about social media. Those are great examples that are pretty modern, that weren't around 10 years ago.
I'll ask you this, Paul. If you don't need money to get your message out, why do we continually see unions, billionaires, and large corporations dump a lot of it into campaigns to get their message out? So much to the fact to where someone that doesn't have the same access to those kinds of resources to get their message out are able to participate. So if you don't need money to get your message out, why do we see $40 billion being spent on elections in a few short years since 2010?
I mean, you do need money to get some of your message out, but you also don't. I mean, we've coming up with many examples for both. I mean, that's their right of unions and employers to use their funds to get their message out. So, I mean, we can go back and forth with example after example of, you can go on your phone, go on Twitter, put out some tweets to your followers, that costs you nothing, Just like, the three of us can make our own newspaper ad and call the Telegram and put it up. I mean, that would cost something. So there's examples both ways, but at the end of the day, you're asking me if, why are employers and unions spending millions of dollars for political advocacy? It's because of their choice. It's their, it's the decision that they made to use their funds a certain way to advocate for their members, their customers, or their employees.
Sure.
After Citizens United happened, it empowered those types of groups, employers, unions, and nonprofit corporations to have a voice in the political process. And, since that has happened, a lot of them are. And the funny, ironic part is that, I'm affiliated with a conservative organization, Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance. We're the state's largest conservative advocacy organization. And after every election cycle, if you follow campaign finance law, 9 of the 10 largest super PACs in Massachusetts are usually union affiliated or union funded. So here I am advocating for freedom of expression for employers and unions. And in Massachusetts, usually the biggest benefactors, the biggest participators are the big, powerful unions in Boston. But you know, it's a moral thing for me. But again, just remind your viewers that now we're talking way past question 2, just more on the topic of campaign finance law.
We want to talk about question 2, all right? And we want to talk, especially, it's about education here, right? Okay, because how many people go into the voter booth, all right? They got their ballot, and they're looking at questions, they don't know anything about it. And they read it, and they're making a decision in there on something pretty important, whether it's yes or no. So for Joe Average, the guy who votes, all right, he is consistent. He cares about his community, but you know, he doesn't know a lot about politics. How can you explain it to him really quickly why he should not vote for it, why he should vote no?
So, boilerplate, question 2 empowers elected officials and others to come up with ways to regulate the public speech.
Okay.
So I would vote no.
Ben?
It does not actually empower our public officials to regulate speech. It establishes a nonpartisan citizen commission to investigate all of the dark sources of money that are making their way into our elections and empowering citizens to have a voice in our democracy, to stand up for political equality so we all have an equal voice in our democracy. I'll also say that when Paul talks about employers, he's mostly talking about corporations and unions, and that's fine. But we are seeing now, you know, corporations that spend money in elections from their general treasuries, use money from their general treasuries. We don't know where that money is coming from, right? Americans don't like it when corporations and brands that they know, whether it's Target or Hobby Lobby or whatever, you know, spend money in elections, so they hide it through dark sources. And there's no way to trace it, so we can see, you know, corporations that might have foreign shareholders in, you know, or affiliated, you know, through their boards, spending money in elections. I read an article from Follow the Money yesterday that said that Saudi Arabia has spent $1.6 million to influence the 2018 elections through dark money channels like lobbyist firms and otherwise. So by unlimited speech and allowing corporations to use funds from their general treasuries, we're opening up our democratic process to be influenced by foreign entities and billionaires and large corporations that want to keep control and not give control back to the people, which is where this belongs. It's why it's fundamental. Sure, we are talking about campaign finance law, but this is the spirit of question 2. The spirit of question 2 is to establish a commission to advance this movement for a 28th Amendment that would give us equal citizenship in a level playing field. That's all we're asking for, is a level playing field, because the person that sends out a tweet to their 28 followers is much different than someone that dumps, you know, $18 million into a campaign to blast ads all over the place. It's a level playing field. That's what this is all about.
So would this say that there's a dollar amount limit that can be donated?
This wouldn't say that, actually. What a 28th Amendment will do, ultimately when ratified, is it will allow Congress and the states to place reasonable limits. It will allow Congress and the states to come up with what are those reasonable limits. So the 28th Amendment doesn't say, here are the limits that we can spend on independent expenditures and contributions, but it will again make it constitutional for Congress and the states to be able to limit how much money people can spend in elections, which we don't have now because the Supreme Court has said that that's unconstitutional. It should be noted that the Supreme Court turned down about a century of precedent that have kept corporate influence out of our elections. This is a very new and very dangerous precedent that the Supreme Court has set us down. And so what question 2, the essence of question 2 is to look at the impacts of money in Massachusetts elections and make recommendations for a 28th Amendment. The reason why I said Paul should apply to be on the commission is maybe he has ideas on what a 28th Amendment could and should say. All people should apply to be on this commission. We're hoping to have a very diverse commission, from geographically diverse, from the Cape all the way to the Berkshires, for age diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and it's an open and transparent process, and we have average citizens, not just lawyers and judges and constitutional scholars, but nurses and teachers and everyone in between who feel, rightly so, that they're losing their voice in our republic. And so this is a very important question to hold our elected officials in Congress accountable and to make these necessary recommendations to return our democracy back to the people.
Oh. You know, as an independent business person, and I have been my whole life, one thing is, this is a tough question for me when I hear it, because both sides are compelling, all right? As an independent business person, and I don't really want anybody telling me what to do. You know, obviously that's why I work for myself. I don't want to tell them what to do, you know? So I have a hard time when I hear, like, government in place to control something. On the other hand, as an independent business person in a small business, a big corporation, I've had this happen, go in and just overwhelm my accounts.
Absolutely.
And take them from me, and there's nothing I can do no matter what I did. So on that hand, I look at it and go, well, I do want some protection, you know?
Well, that's why you'll see the majority of small business owners in favor of campaign finance reform, because they can't compete on the same level as the big box stores and the large corporations that do spend money in elections.
But I mean, isn't that just kind of like America, though, too? I mean, you know, in America, there's always been that guy who's Rockefeller. All right, guy has tremendous control because he went out and got it. You know, and he had a vision, and he was, you know, an alpha male. All right, so to speak. All right.
Yeah.
So isn't there an opportunity for someone else to be counter, you know, Rockefeller, so to speak?
I would say that isn't America. I think that we have always accepted inequity in our economic sphere. The Rockefellers, you know, the folks that have done very well for themselves, and I think that they should continue to do that. This hasn't done any. This question 2 in the 28th Amendment has nothing to do with that. What we don't accept or have never accepted in our country is inequity in citizenship. Just because Rockefeller, you know, made millions of dollars and the people that, you know, were working on the railroads did not mean that they were separate classes of citizens.
Yeah.
Our founding documents, our Constitution, made sure and made clear that we do not have a class of citizens. We might have, you know, economic classes. We've always accepted that in America. Those economic classes are growing more and more disparaged. We've accepted that, but we've never accepted political classes or classes of citizenship. That's what we have now. We have classes of citizens where, you know, average Joe voter can't participate in the same way that, say, the modern day, you know, Rockefeller would be.
Yeah.
Whether it's on the Democratic side with George Soros or whether it's on the Republican side, you know, with Sheldon Adelson or whomever. This is, you know, Democrats do it, Republicans do it, independents do it. There's too much money coming to our system from all sides. And that's why there's such broad cross-partisan support for this reform, including people like Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, but also Charlie Baker and other representatives in the State House, Republican and Democrat alike. So it's important for your viewers to understand that this is not about trying to limit businesses or limit unions. Unions still have the ability to do collective bargaining and fight for worker safety and all of the things that unions were designed to do. This isn't about, you know, saying that government saying to businesses you can't do something. This is about a level playing field for everybody and equal citizenship as instructed and mandated in our founding documents.
All right. So we're coming near the end. So before we get to the end, I want you each to be able to tell people where they can go to see your side of the story, your side of the story. All right. Paul, where can people go? We'll put it up on the screen too so people can read it, but why don't you just say, where can people go to learn more about what you're talking about?
You know, our website, massfiscal.org, has some positions on there, but also the Secretary of State's website has the yes and no positions for both organizations. So I think that's an appropriate space to look.
Ben?
Yeah, you can go to peoplegovernNotMoney.org to find out all the things that you need to know about Question 2, what the ballot language is, what the Citizen Commission does, what are the timelines, all of those details that I think are really important to voters. And then for more information about this national cross-partisan movement for a 28th Amendment, you can go to AmericanPromise.net.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we got a couple minutes left. Ben, please add whatever you'd like to add now. And
You're looking at me, but you're saying Ben, so maybe you mean Paul.
Paul.
I do mean Paul. I absolutely mean Paul. You know, hey, on the Matt Ligor show, you don't ever get called the right name, all right? So, Paul, please, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Matt, I would just say, I heard that you said that you own a business. What kind of business do you own?
I own an automotive business. I do paintless dent removal.
Okay, great.
It's called Dent Craft, right here in North Reading.
Well, you know, one thing, this was a good conversation about campaign finance law. We didn't really get too into the details of Question 2 or the details of the amendment that's being proposed to the U.S. Constitution. But one thing I would say is, you know, businesses do have rights. Are businesses people? No, they're not, clearly. Businesses, which include nonprofit corporations and unions, they all have different rights. I mean, your business has rights, all right? I can't go to your company and say, Matt, I want to see a list of all your customers. You would say, Craney, turn around and go back home. Just like the North Reading Police Department can't come to your business and say, I want to see all your personnel records. You would say, go get a warrant. Your business has a right to advocate for the business interest and for its employees and its management. Much bigger businesses, let's just use, you know, boogeyman businesses, ExxonMobil, whatever you want to, you know, demagogue. When you look at big businesses, they actually, you know, they do benefit a lot of people, their customers, their employees, their shareholders. There's a lot of people who have their retirement in shares and stocks. I do. Many people do. So you actually do want to know how businesses feel about important issues and about candidates. But one other little thing to think about is when you have employers, when you have nonprofits, when you have unions that want to express their point of view in their communities, that's their right. And that's what Citizens United allowed that to happen. There could be candidates running for offices who have positions that would impact those organizations. And those organizations want to be able to speak freely about those candidates. But also there could be pieces of legislation that would impact those businesses, and they want the opportunity to speak about the legislation and the policies. But on the other side of that too, there's also the communities that are involved with these different entities. They want to hear from how these pieces of legislation or these candidates would impact their employers, their unions, or their nonprofit organizations. And so what Citizens United did was it allowed them the opportunity to speak up. So that, you know, for that reason, I think it's fair and clear, allows all these different entities, employers, nonprofit corporations, unions, and individuals, all the same opportunity. But this is a good conversation. I'm glad we had it. I love talking about campaign finance law. It's super complicated. The average person, God bless you if you like this stuff. Happy to talk to anyone, any of your viewers. They can check out our website. They can shoot me an email that way. And I'm happy to be on your show, so thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for doing such a great job explaining it too. So Ben, in summary?
Sure. And it is a good conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to have it. It is important. This is something that I believe, you know, is integral to the foundations of our democracy. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about a corporation's ability to express their views, they're expressing their views through ads, mostly, from money that goes untraced and unchecked. Now, a corporation might not be so keen on putting their views out into the public, which is why they actually use these dark channels, 501c4 organizations, et cetera, so they don't have to disclose where that money is coming from. So they're not just simply expressing their views, they're making investments, right? The folks that are spending a lot of money in our elections and government are not doing so out of the goodness of their heart or because they're philanthropists. They're doing so because they're making investments, right? And they're getting return on their investment. And if you look at, you know, a corporation like Paul had pointed out, like Exxon, right? And their Exxon's ability to have, you know, to be able to speak and to exercise their views, no one's thinking in their head, oh, the beleaguered Exxon Corporation, they really need a level playing field. No, of course not, because they have been determining, policy when it comes to our environment and energy for many, many years, right? And will continue to do so. But the dangerous precedent that has been set since Citizens United, since Buckley v. Vallejo in the 70s and others, is that these corporations have an unlimited ability to influence elections and silence the voice of the masses of people. That's what this is all about. This is about giving citizens and our democracy an equal voice to participate, of which we don't have now. And we think that that's foundational. We think that that's not what the founders of this country had in mind when they drafted the Constitution. They had this idea of political equality. When you look at First Amendment free speech, you have to consider it in the framework of the entire Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. And the framework of the Constitution is founded in political equality. And that's what Question 2 is all about. Question 2 is about political equality for all Americans to have an equal voice in our democracy. Go to AmericanPromise.net, go to peoplegovernNotMoney.org so you can find out more and vote yes on 2, because it's about time that we return our republic back to citizens, not just to big money and special interests.
All right. Wow. That was a lot of information covered in just a little over half an hour. Ben, Paul, I really want to thank you for taking the time. Really, seriously, taking the time to come out, explain your side of it so that people can be educated on it. Because, people are going to walk into that booth, like I said, and not know anything. So I encourage people to take 10 minutes, Google it, and at least read what it's about. All right?
Absolutely.
And check out both your sites there to see, we'll put those up. Both your sites so people can have a real understanding. Hear
Sure.
both sides of it. All right.
Sure.
All right, we want to thank you. All right, look at
Thanks,
this, a
Ben.
nice handshake. All right, all the way through.
All right.
All right. All right, we want to thank you for watching, and we hope this helped you. Get out to the voters booth next Tuesday. You can also do early voting. We want to thank our guests, Ben and Paul, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.